Alright guys, so now we're going to be designing this beautiful portfolio website. After we're done with it, you can feel free to customize it however you want and make it your own website so that you can put your own work on it and make it your own portfolio website. So let's just go through it before we start designing it. So let's go through it. As you can see over here, we have this beautiful background image, and right on top of it is the self-promotional section. So it will basically contain your image and a small paragraph about yourself to introduce yourself and your name. And if we go down, then we have a small navigation section. Right, if we go right over here, we have the services, work, and contact. So you can basically navigate to the page you want to see, to the section basically. So this website is actually going to be a flat page website. So each page will have its own section basically. And over here you can have your own services that you provide. So for example, you might do DevOps, or you might, for example, you're a front-end developer and a back-end developer. You can basically put in the services that you offer. And if we go down, now you can basically display the work that you have already worked on. So the projects that you have already completed, you can basically put them over here. And finally, we have a contact form as well. So if anyone wants to work with you and wants you to work on their own project, they can contact you directly from your website. Okay, so now that we have done showing it, now let's actually build it. So first of all, go to your workspace and make a new folder for this project. So we're going to call it portfolio. So once we've made this folder, we can now open it using Visual Studio Code. So now that we have opened the folder, we can basically have a new file, and let's call it index.html. And inside this, let's do the scaffolding for the HTML so that we have a nice template. And now let's go into the head section, so we can basically put in our title. So let's put in our title. In this case, we'll do like Alex Jensen. And another thing we need to use is the CDN for Tailwind, so we can actually use the classes. So make sure you link the CDN inside the head section. So go to Tailwind and find the actual CDN, and we can find it right over here. Now after that, we can basically get started with the main body section. So let's enter the main body section, but before we do that, let's also style the body section. So we're going to style the body. First of all, we're going to use the initialize class. So what this does is that when we have text inside this body section, the text will actually be a much darker, like the same color as the background, but it will have a much darker shade, so it will stand out. It gives it a really nice effect. Next, we're going to give it a background color. Actually, before we do that, let's make the positioning relative, and then we're going to give we're going to use text gray 600 to make the text a gray with a shade of 600. And after that, inside this body section, we're going to have a div. Now this div is going to basically hold the background image, so we're going to use absolute positioning for it, so it's always at the top, and we're going to use width full, and we will do minimum height of the screen. And so again, we use absolute positioning because it's going to be its own separate thing. We don't really care about the elements after it. And inside this div, we're going to have another div that will also be positioned absolutely using absolute positioning, and then we're going to use a z index of 0. We're going to make it go to the back using z0. So then it will basically, the z axis, it will make it go to the 0. So if we have elements in front of it, we can do that using the z index or z axis. Then we're going to also stick it to the top using top 0. And we will use width full, so it takes up the entire width. And we will give it a height of half. And a background, for the background, we're going to use background cover. This way, the image, because this div is going to basically contain an image, that will be the background of the website. And using BG cover, this will ensure that the image covers the entire div area. Now let's also use BG bottom so that the background is actually aligned to the bottom, and let's actually now give it an image to see how it looks. You're free to use whatever image you like, but in our case we'll be using our own image. And let's see how that looks. So all the images that I'm going to use in this website, I'm also going to put them in a text file, so you're free to use them. Basically, I'll put the URLs in there. Okay, so now let's see how that looks. Let's actually open this in Chrome, and as you can see, it looks beautiful. So next, we're going to have a navigation section. So we're just going to have a new div after the image div that we have just implemented. And for this div, we're going to use absolute positioning. And now we're going to make this come forward in front of the image. So we will use Z20 in this case, so that it's higher Z-axis, and then it will be on top of that image. And we're going to use bottom 10, so that it's at the bottom, but it's 10 pixels basically. So it's 10 above bottom. And we're going to make it stuck from right to left as well, so right 0 and left 0, so that way it's basically it has no margins. And we'll use inline flex to make it so that the elements inside it will basically be in one line. And we're going to use space x20, so that we're going to have a horizontal spacing of 20. And then we'll use justify center, so that all the elements inside this div, so the navigation items, will basically be centered. And we'll use font bold to make the font bold, and we're going to use uppercase to make the words, the navigation text, and using uppercase letters. Tracking, we're going to do tracking wide. For the color, we'll also do text gray 600. So we're using tracking wide so that we have more spacing between the words, so that the text is basically more is wider basically. Now, after we've done that, let's add some anchors inside it, so we can have an anchor for each section. So first of all, we're going to have services, and we're going to connect it to the services section, so that when the user clicks on this, it will take us to the ID of the services. And for the class, we're going to use text cyan, so that way it has this nice color with a shade of 600. And this is going to be the same for all the other three links, so we're just going to copy and paste it and just change we're going to change the href, and we're going to change the actual content of the anchor, the text, sorry. So we're going to do work, and then we're going to do contacts. Now let's see how that looks. Alright, beautiful. Now it's stuck to over here, and we have this section which we can use for the, so we have the image which takes up half of the height of the screen, as I explained, and now we have this area to put in our self-promotion section. Alright guys, so now we're going to be working on the self-introduction section, which is basically going to be right in the center of the main page. So right after we done the navigation div, which is basically centered to the bottom, now we're going to be working on the self-promotion div. So let's open a div right after, so we have the anchors, then we have two divs after it. After those two divs, we'll open a new div. Now for this div, we're going to be using relative positioning. We also want the index to be so the z-axis index is going to be 10. That way it will be above the, it will be above the image, the background image, because the background image is Z0 and Z10 is basically higher than Z0, so it will be on top of it. That way we have that nice effect where the self-promotion will be centered in, and the navigation will be on the bottom and the background will be on the top. When we have that done, we will have a really nice front page. I mean, you've seen the video that I illustrated at the start of the project. Pretty much, yeah, it's pretty much going to be like that. So let's get started with this div. So again, after Z20, we're going to have background. Sorry, Z10. After that, we're going to have we're going to use flex, and we will set the minimum height of minimum height will be the height of the screen. Now the height will be automatic, so that this div will basically match the content of this div. So whatever the content is, it will basically adjust the height accordingly. And we want to use justify center and item center, so that we can position the elements inside the self promotion to center it. Now inside this div, we're going to have a new div that will basically hold the content of this self promotion section, and this div is going to be relatively positioned, so we'll use relative class, and then we'll use max width for Excel. Now inside this, we're going to have another div, and this div is going to basically have a nice gradient effect. So we're going to this is going to have a gradient effect. We're going to have two colors, one primary and one secondary, and we will have the gradient going from primary to secondary. Now we're going to use absolute positioning for this one, and we will set the index to 10, Z10, and that way it will also be above the background, but it wouldn't be above the main parent. But anyway, so then we'll set inset 0. Now, what inset 0 does is that we know that we have those top, left and right, bottom, we have those classes, so we can do top 0, and that will make it stick to 0. Sorry, it will make it stick to the top. If we do left 0, it will make the div elements stuck to the left. And if we do we'll do right 0, it will make it stuck to the right. So it means that we have 0 pixels from the right or 0 pixels from the left. What inset 0 does, it does all of them together. So it does top 0, left 0, right 0, bottom 0, and that will basically stick this element, and it would remove any It would remove any spacing between this element and the parent element. Now we want to use a gradient, so we'll do background gradient, so BG gradient, and we want this gradient to be from left to right, so we will do BG gradient 2R, and we're going to have two colors, so we're going to have a primary and a secondary color. So we'll need to have a class to use this from primary. We're going to have a custom from primary, so we're going to use from primary to secondary, these two classes, which we will actually implement ourselves. We'll override these classes from Tailwind, and we will do, they're going to be custom classes, and we will also use shadow large to give it a shadow, and we will do apply a transformation to this, because what this does, this div is responsible for having the gradient, and also if you look back at the first design that I showed you, you can see that the gradient is a bit skewed and it's rotated, and so it has that nice effect that I showed you. So we're going to apply this using transform. So we use transform skew y6, so that will basically kind of bend the card in a way. It will skew it vertically, so transform skew y6, and then we'll do, for small devices, we will do skew vertical 0. That way we don't really skew it, I think, on small devices. And on small devices we also want to minus rotate it 6. We want to do minus rotate 6. And also for small devices we also want to give it a rounded of large, so that way it has a bigger border radius. And by using this transformation, basically it will we will have a nice effect with this card, and it will have would give it that cool effect that you have seen. So now let's set up these two classes to set up the gradient. So we go in the style, and then we have these two CSS classes that we're going to be using from primary, which will basically use a gradient from a specific color that we will be using. So these colors and the images that I will be using in this project, they will all be included inside a text file. So if you want to use these as well, then you can just check it out in the text file. Otherwise you are free to use your own colors and customize it how you like. So you are free to use the specific Tailwind classes that I have shown you in the introduction. I mean, you can go on the Tailwind documentation and it shows you like how to use it. Basically, you can choose whatever color you want to another, like from this color to another color, which is a Tailwind color. But in our case, I want to use a specific color, so I will use that. I will basically have it in our style. You can basically copy and paste what I have used, or you can use one of those Tailwind colors, the standard colors. So we have done this beautiful gradient skewed div. Now after it, I'm going to have a new div. Now this div is actually going to hold the content of our self-promotion or self-introduction, and this div is going to be relatively positioned, and we will use Z20 because we've done Z10 for the root div and the gradient div. Now we want to have a div element above both of these. So because the other ones are Z10, this is Z20. We're using Z20 now, so that it's on top of them. And we want to have the background white, using BG white. And for medium devices, we will use flex, and we will use justify between. So just to explain what justify between does, basically the elements will have equal amount spaces between them. So all the elements inside this card will have equal spacing between them. Now after that, we're going to be using P12, and this will give a padding on all sides of the. So we'll have a 12 padding on all sides, and then we'll use shadow large to give it a shadow, and we'll use rounded large as well to give it a border radius. And then we want to make this width full, so we'll use width full basically. We'll use W full. And for the maximum width, we want it to be 4XL. So max width 4XL. That way, it's basically it's like floating on top of all the other cards. Now inside this div that we have just done, we're going to have a new div which will basically hold the contents. So just to correct myself, the div that we have just finished, that was actually a card div. As you can see, we've done the Z20 and the BG white. That gives it a nice card design. And after it, we're going to have a new div that will be a container for the actual content of the self-promotion or self-introduction. So before we continue, let's go to Google Chrome and let's see how it's looking so far. Let's refresh. As you can see, so far it's still like it's empty. So the width is going to be it's going to be small because we have nothing inside it. Once we have the content inside it, then it will basically adjust the width. Now we will have the container for the. So we'll have the container for the content of this self-promotion card. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's open a new div inside this one, and so this div is going to be inside the card that I have just mentioned. Now for this card, which will be a container for the content of the self-promotion, self-introduction content. So basically, we're going to use flex for small devices, and for other devices, we'll use flex col. So it will be a column, and we want to have spacing between the elements. So we'll use justify between, and we also want to have a vertical spacing of 6. So we'll use space y 6. And a padding, a vertical padding of 6, so that's so basically we have padding on top and bottom. And for medium devices, we want to have a padding right of 10. So the reason we have used space y 6 is because it will give spacing between the elements of 6, and padding y 6 will only give the top and bottom padding of 6 basically. So that's the difference between space y 6 and padding y 6. So now that we have done that, now we can basically we can have a new div, a small div that will basically hold the h. Will basically have like an introduction. So let's go ahead and implement the introduction. So we're going to have a h2, and we're going to say hello, I am, and then after it we're going to have a h1, and we're going to say the name, which is Alex Jensen. And let's see how that looks. as you can see. It will be much bigger as well when we add the image and a paragraph as well. But let's just style up these H2 and H1, these two headings. So for this first one, let's make it large using text large, and let's see how that looks. And for the second one, let's use padding top 1, so that there's some padding between it and the first heading. And let's make it really big as well. Let's use text 5XL. And let's make it bold. Now let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks very nice. Now we want to make it a different color. So let's just do a dark shade of grey, so text grey 800. Okay, that looks good. Now after it, we're going to have a paragraph. So it's going to be a self-introduction. So the skills of yourself, or whatever you want to include over here. So you can say like, okay, I am a full stack web developer who crafts beautiful websites. So in this case, we'll write that. So actually, you do not need hello I am, because you already included it in the headings. Just right. Actually, yeah, we'll just use lorem ipsum. Let's see how that looks. Okay, beautiful. Now let's style this up. Let's make the text extra large, and let's see how that looks. Okay, that's better. And also we need to, yeah, let's do leading relaxed, so that there's more spacing between the lines. And let's add some more lorem ipsum as well. Now let's see how that looks. Okay, very nice. So now we're going to have a new div. So after this paragraph that we have just done, right after it is going to be a closing tag, and after the closing tag, we're going to have a new image tag. And for this image tag, again, we're going to be using just a profile picture. You're free to use the profile picture that we used, or you can basically use your own profile picture. So yeah. So now we're going to add in the URL that we want to use. You can basically take it from the text file if you want to as well, or you can just use yours. And so we're going to be doing that. And also we're going to be applying some classes. So let's use width 80 and round it full. So it looks circular and it has a width of 80. And let's have a look. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, we need to definitely style it to make it go on the right. So let's use flex shrink 0 to stop it from shrinking. And let's see how that looks. We have an issue. That's because we have misplaced the paragraph. The paragraph is meant to be right under the div that contains the headings, and that's why, because we have a column, so that's why those two will be in a column. And then after this column, so this column is basically holding the paragraph and a div that basically holds the headings. So we want those to be in a column. So basically the paragraph goes under the div that is holding the headings. So make sure you put it that way. And then after that, after the column div, we're going to have the image. That's where the image should be. And now let's see if that is actually working now. As you can see, it's working perfectly. We just need to add some more styles to it. So now we're also going to do border 6, so that the border will have a width of 6, and we'll also do border white to make it to make the color of it white, and we'll give it a shadow of medium. So now let's see how that looks. We should be done with the, yeah, it looks absolutely stunning. It looks very beautiful. The only issue is that we have a card behind it that is skewed and it has a gradient and it's not actually showing. So So we need to fix this because we have an issue in the classes. So the transform is a class by itself, so we need to give it a space between the skew. So that was actually the issue. Now if we refresh, we should have this beautiful gradient. Guys, so now we're going to be working on the services section. This is going to have all the services that you provide. In our case, we're going to have 3 services. So let's get started with it. So first of all, let's have a new div. Let's make a new section first. So we're going to give it an ID of services. That way we can basically navigate to it. And for the classes, we're going to make the background grey with a shade of 50. So we want just a tint of grey. And we're also going to give it a padding top of 20 and a padding bottom of 28 and a padding horizontal of 8. So basically padding left and right of 8. Yeah. And inside this section, we're going to have a div that we will style it using. So we'll use max width 6x large, and we will do the margin horizontal auto, so it will basically center it. Now inside this div that we have just made, we're going to make a new div that will basically hold the content of like the title of this section, which is the services and like here's what I offer. So this div is going to be just going to center this text, so it's going to center the title, and yeah, so we'll just do div class text center. And inside this, we're going to have a h1 called services, which is the title of the section, and right under it will be a paragraph tag, and we'll say, okay, here's what I offer. And now let's see how that looks. Let's refresh. Okay, beautiful. We need to definitely style these h1 and paragraph. Okay, so for the h1, let's make it bigger using text 6XL. Okay, that looks good. And let's also make the text grey 300. So it's less dark. Okay, no, that's very light. Let's make it 800. Okay, that's much better. Now for the paragraph, let's just give it some more padding between them because it's quite stuck to it. So we'll do padding top of 2. And let's refresh. Okay, perfect. Now under this div that holds the h1 and paragraph, right under it, we're going to have a new div, and this is going to hold the content of the services section. So basically the is going to have the cards that each card represents a service. So yeah, let's do that now. So for this div, it's going to have a margin top of 24, so we basically have some margin between the title and the content. And we're going to use the grid class, so we're going to be using a grid, and we're going to have one column, so grid calls 1. And for medium devices, we're going to have 2 columns, so grid calls 2, and for large devices, we're going to have 3 columns. Okay, so the way the grid system works is, so if we have let's say grid calls 3, and let's say we have 9 elements inside this grid, then what it will do, it would basically show the elements in a 3x3 fashion. So it would have a grid of 3 rows and 3 columns. Now, well, I mean 3 items in a row, and it will have 3 columns. We also need some gap between the items, so let's use gap 20. That way the grid will ensure that there's a gap between each item using the spacing of 20. And inside this div, we want to have a new div inside it, which will basically hold we'll have like a nice card effect with a gradient. So to do this, well, we're going to have a root div first of all before we actually get into the details. So let's make this root div using relative positioning. So we're just going to have a div with the relative position, and inside this div we will have the div that will have the gradients basically. So we'll make a new div and we will have absolute positioning, and we will use we'll give it a z-axis of 10. That way it will be behind the content that we're going to put on it. It will be behind the card, and after we make it after we give it z10, we'll do inset 0. That way it will be, so what inset does is we'll do top 0, left 0, right 0 and bottom 0. It basically it will make sure that there's no spacing between all the sides. So it's basically it has no spacing between all the sides. And then we will use bg gradient to right. So we'll use a background gradient to right. That way the gradient is going from left to right. And again, we're going to be using the custom colors that we have defined in the style section, and we will use from primary to secondary. So we're going to have 2 colors that the gradient would work on, and we're going to also use shadow large so that there's some shadow. And so now let's also give it transform, so we can apply the skew and the rotation and give it that nice effect. So we'll use transform, and then after the transform class we'll use negative skew of vertical 6. So we're going to use a negative skew vertical of 6, and then for small devices we're going to remove the skew. We only want it on other devices that are not small, and for small devices we're actually just going to rotate 6 instead of using skew. And we're also going to give it a border radius, like a decent border radius, using rounded large for small devices only. Now after this div we will have a new div, and this is going to be relatively positioned, and we will use this div. This div is going to be the container of the service, so this is going to be like a card for each service. So we want this to be on top of the gradient, so we have to use Z20 to make it on top, because the other one is Z10, so the higher the Z index, the Z axis will basically bring it forward. Now we will also make it white, background color of white, using BG white, and we will make the height full, so using H full. It will basically match the parent's height, so we'll take as much height as you can. And we will do rounded medium, so the border radius will be medium, and we'll give it a shadow of medium as well. And for the horizontal padding, we'll give it a horizontal padding of 10, and for vertical padding we will do PY12. Now inside this div we're going to have a now let's see how that looks before we continue. Okay, so let's refresh. As you can see, just like I explained to you, it looks very nice. So now we need to add the content inside it. So we're going to have an image first. So first of all, I'm going to have an image for the content. So right inside this card that we have just done, we're going to have an image. Now this image is going to be styled using rounded top medium. So that way it's going to have only the top side rounded for the border radius, and it's going to be rounded using the medium levels, not going to be rounded too much. And now let's put in the source. So again, you guys can use whatever images you want, but if you want to use the images that I have used, you can find them in the text file. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the first image from the notes. And now let's see how that actually looks. Alright, so we definitely need to style it. We want to basically let's go back to Chrome. So we want to stick it to the top, so that the border radius actually matches the top one as well. It's going to look very nice. It's going to look like it's on the edge, and then we're going to have the content under it. So let's first style it properly. So we want to. Okay, so we've done the rounded. Let's do now services image height. We're going to have a custom class called services image height, and we will do this using CSS so that it can actually be done properly, like it can be done specifically how we want it to be. So let's go to the style section again, and we want to so the reason why we've done this is so that all the images can be exactly the same height to 220 pixels. Because the thing is, with the Tailwind CSS, you have these heights, but they're not specific. Like, you can't do exact pixels, so we want it to be exactly 220 pixels. That's why we're using custom CSS. And we're doing this as a class so that we can reuse it. Now let's see how that looks. Okay, so now the image height changed, and we're going to do that for the other two images as well. So just like I explained, we want to make the image stuck to the top. So as you can see over here, the issue is we have some padding on top of this, so we have to remove this padding from the parent element that the image is in. So we want to remove the padding, the vertical padding, and also the horizontal one because we want to be snug on both sides. As you can see now, it fits perfectly in. We just need to add the content under it. So let's go ahead and now let's open a new div right under the image. So under the image element, we're going to have a new div, and we're going to give this. So this div is going to hold the content of the service, so the title and the description basically. And for this div, we're going to give it a padding horizontal of 10 and a padding bottom of 6. The first element is going to hold is a H2 heading 2 element, and we're going to, for example, the first service that we provide, let's call it, we make responsive websites. So let's just write responsive websites, and let's see how that looks. Okay, not bad. And now let's add some description under it as well. We need to style them now, I guess, but let's just do the content first before we style it. So let's just do some lorem ipsum for the description, and let's see how that looks now. Okay, not very good. We need to. So first of all, we need to give the padding we need to give the paragraph some padding, so that there's some spacing between the description and the title. So we'll do PT2, and let's see how that looks. Okay, just a bit more. We'll do PT3. Now for the H2, we're also going to give it some padding, so that there's some padding between the image as well. We'll do PT3 as well, and we want to make it bold as well, and we need to make it bigger. So let's use font bold to make it bold, and we'll do text to Excel. Okay, perfect. Let's also change the color as well. Let's make it a grey of 800, of shade 800. So text grey shade 800. Yeah, that looks really good now. So now we just have to copy and paste this pretty much 3 times actually. So the relative div that is the container of this entire service, as I explained in the beginning of this card. So we want to copy paste it from the div class equals relative. So from there we want to copy paste it 3 times. 2 times because we already have one done. So now let's see how that looks. Okay, beautiful. Now we need to change the description and the titles and the images for the other 2. So now for the other 2, we're going to have so we design web apps as well for the second one, and the last one we'll do mobile apps. And for the images, we're going to use our own images, which you can use as well. You can get them from the text file that I have included. So let's go ahead and actually get them and paste them. Now let's see how that looks. Let's refresh it. It looks absolutely stunning. So the only comments I have is basically we need to give this some background color as well, so that it looks much better. So we will use BG blue, So we'll go to the image, the PNG image in the middle, and we'll give it a class of BG blue with a shade of 500. And let's see how that looks. That looks really dark. Let's change it to 200. That looks much better. I would say just a bit less as well. We'll do 100. No, 200 was better. Yeah, we'll keep it at 200. So we have some issues with the border radius now. That is because we have added a new class tag. So we need to remove this and basically put it inside the other class that we have already used. So we already have a class attribute. That's what we need to put in our BG class. Background color blue class. Okay. So now, as you can see, the border radius is perfect. It's working as it should be. And yeah, now we can continue to the next section. Alright, so now we're going to work on the work section. So the work section will consist of your own portfolio, so the projects that you've worked on, and yeah, and your achievements if you want to do that. So let's start with this work section. First of all, we're going to have the section with the ID work, so that we can navigate to it. And we're going to use padding vertical 20, so we have padding top and padding bottom of 20, and we're also going to have padding horizontal of 8 using px8. Inside this section, we're going to have a div that will basically hold the other div elements. So this div is going to have a max width of 6xl, and for the margin we'll do margin auto for horizontal margin, so mx auto. Now inside this we're going to have another div, and this div will basically hold the title and the description of this section. So let's make this div, and then let's center it as well using text center. And inside this center div we will have a h1, and we will put in the title of the section, which is work. And let's also add a paragraph as well, like a description. We'll just do like some blurb, or here is my portfolio. We'll just put in here is my portfolio. Okay, so now let's see how that looks. As you can see, definitely needs some styling. Okay, but we're on the right track. So let's do. So for the H1, let's give it 6xl. Let's see how. Actually, let's do 6xl. And let's refresh. Okay, that looks much better. And let's also make it bold. Okay, it's looking good. The color is a bit too dark. Let's do fonts. Let's do text gray 400. Actually, let's do 700. Yeah, that looks really good now. Now, for the paragraph, let's just give it some. It's good how it is. Let's just let's just give it a padding top of 2. Let's also increase the size of it. It's a bit too small. Let's see. Let's try. Just write 2xl. Yeah, okay, that's a bit too big. Let's do just XL. Yeah, that looks perfect now. So let's also keep the design consistent, because I just remembered now. On the services section, the paragraph needs to also be a bit bigger. So let's also make that XL. So go up and then change the paragraph from. Let's add text XL to it. And now that should, now the design is consistent. Okay. So now that we have done the title of the section and then the description as well, now right under this div that holds the title and description, we're going to have a new div. Now this div is actually going to it's going to give us a grid, and That way basically we can have the layout. It will basically set up the layout for the work tiles, like the projects that you're going to add here. So let's give it a margin top of 16, and let's use grid to make this into a grid so that the items are laid out in a grid form. And we're also going to use grid calls 1. That way by default, so the grid is 1 column only, but for medium devices we'll do 2 columns. So we want on small devices we want the grid to only consist of 1 column, and for medium devices we want it to have 2 columns, and for large devices we want the grid to have 3 columns. So large devices we also want to add that in, so large devices grid calls 3, and we also want to give it a gap. So for the grid, when it has the items, we want space between the items of 14, so we'll do gap 14. Now inside this div that we have just done, the grid div, we want to have the project card. So the first project card. Now for the first card project, we want this item to take up 2 slots. So the first projects, we want it to be treated as 2 projects in one. So to do this in the grid, so we want the grid to basically give this project a space of 2 projects, or a space of 2 cards. To do this, we will have to use let's see. Yeah, so we will have to use a call span of 2. So we will first of all, let's make the background white to make this into a card, and we will also, so we're going to have a div with a background white, and we're going to make the border radius medium using rounded medium, and we're also going to have the shadow medium. And for large devices, we only want this to take up 2 slots only on large devices. On medium devices and small devices, we want it to be normal, just 1 item. But for large devices, we want it to take 2 slots. So we'll do call span 2 for large devices. The reason we're only using we're making this card into 2 slots only for large devices and not medium and small devices is for basically design purposes. So small devices we can't anyway, because it only has 1 slot, and for medium devices it does have 2 columns, but it's going to look ugly. So you're going to have space on the second column, where the first one will take 2 slots and the second one would it wouldn't look that consistent. So we're just going to do this on large devices because we have the space to do so. It can be done on medium devices, but I guess we're just going to do this for large devices. So we're also going to have an image inside it. Now this image is going to be the project featured image. So yeah, we're going to use our own image. You're free to use your own, or use the one from the text file. So I will include the one that we use in the text file, so make sure to check it out if you want to use it. Okay, so now I'm going to copy and paste the image so let's copy and paste the image for this first project, and then let's also see how that looks. As you can see, it looks beautiful. Now we need to continue with styling it. Okay. So for the first image, let's make it let it cover the whole area. So we'll do object cover, and we'll also give it a width full and a height of 80. Now after this image, we want to have a container for the description of this image. So the title, the description, and the paragraph. So basically, before we do that, let's see how the image is looking now. Okay, yeah, but it's looking good. We just need to now do this div right under the image. Let's make this div, and inside this div, let's give it a h3 for the title of the project, and let's have a paragraph for the description of the project. And also let's have a button, anchor basically, that will actually take you to the project if you want to know more about the project. So let's also add that. And for the anchor, we're just going to write view more. And for the paragraph, let's add some text. Now let's see how that actually looks. Okay, we need to style it up. So for the heading, let's give it a. Actually, let's make the div. Let's give padding to the div that the description and title of the project are in. So let's give it a padding of 8. Okay, that's better. Now we need to make the title bigger. So we'll give it a text to Excel. Okay, we want to also make it bold. And let's give it a text grade of 700 or 800. Okay. Now for the description, let's just leave it how it is. Just give it padding of 3 or 2. Let's do 3. PT3. Okay, that looks much better. Now let's just make the text. No, let's leave the text. Let's just remove some. We have too much lorem ipsum. Let's just remove a bit of it. Let's just remove 2 words actually. Yeah. Okay, that's actually. That's probably, yeah, that's good. Okay, now for the anchor, let's style the anchor now. Let's use inline block, so it takes up the entire block. And let's do margin top 4, so that there's some margin between it and the description. And let's do padding horizontal of 6, so that there's some horizontal padding basically, so that it's not stuck to the card border or not stuck to the side of the card. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, we need to continue styling it. Now let's also do, so we done margin top for okay, let's do padding vertical as well too, so that there's some padding as well, so that's because we're going to make this into a button, so that way the text and the edge of the button, there's some spacing between them. And let's give this a gradient using BG gradient. And we're going to do direction from left to right, so we'll do BG gradient to R. And the colors that we're going to use 2 colors, just like we done for the other cards, the other gradients. So from primary to secondary. And let's also make this rounded medium. And let's also do shadow medium. And let's see how the button is looking now. Okay, much better. We just need to make it white as well. The text needs to be white. Yep, that looks much better. Let's see, what else should we do? Let's make it bold as well. Yeah, let's just make the text a bit smaller now. Let's do text SM. Okay, perfect now. Now we need to do the other project. So basically we're done with the first project card. Now we can do the second project card. So now we're going to have another card project. So this is going to be exactly the same as the first one. The only difference is that the first one we have call span 2, so that when we're using the grid will know that the first item will take up 2 slots, whereas this second item, it will take up only 1 slot. So we're going to copy and paste it. The only things we're going to change is we're going to remove the LG call span 2, so it can take up 1 slot, and we're also going to change the image, so that it's a different image for the second. So this image is also going to have different dimensions, and you are free to use our image, or you can basically choose your own image. So we're going to include it in the text file as well, so you can take it from there. So now let's see how that looks. Looks absolutely brilliant. It's very nice. Yeah, I mean, I would say let's give for both card items, let's just give it some border radius to keep it consistent, because we're using it for the other images. So we'll just do rounded medium for all of them, for both images. So in the image classes, just do rounded medium to give it a border radius. So rounded top as well, we only want the top. So rounded top medium. Same thing for the first card, first image. We'll do rounded top, medium, and then let's see how that looks. Okay, as you can see, only the top has been rounded, and it looks very nice. So let's continue, and we're going to have another 2 items now. So the other 2 items, again, we're just going to copy and paste it. So now we're going to copy and paste 2 more items, so 2 more projects. The only difference is now is that the first one is going to be like the second one, and so we have the first one that I told you takes 2 slots, and the second one takes 1 slot. So now we want the third one to also take 1 slot. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's copy and paste the second one, and we also want to have a 4th one as well, which is going to be the same as the first one. So let's do that as well. Let's copy and paste the first one after that, and now let's see how that looks. Okay, brilliant. So now we just need to change the images, and we should be good to go, and we should be done with this section. So as you can see, the grid is basically doing the work, where it's basically putting them together, and it's giving the ones that we want to give them 2 slots. It's basically doing that for us. Yeah, it's very simple. Now we just want to change the images, and you can take those images from the text file if you want to, or you can use your own. Okay, now let's see how that looks with the new images. Absolutely brilliant. Looks beautiful. Stunning. Okay, so just to also cover the navigation bar that we have done before. So as you can see, each navigation item has an anchor, and that anchor will take us to the section. That's why we have IDs for the section, so we can navigate to them. So as you can see, if we click on work, it should basically take us down to work. If we click on the other ones, if we click on services, it should take us down to services. So we've done our services section, we have our work section. Now we are on the last section, which is the contact section. So let's open the section tags after the last section that we have done, which is the work section. So after the work section, we're going to have new section tags for the contact section. And let's give this an ID of contact. And we want to give it some padding between the other sections. So we'll do padding top 20. And we will do padding bottom 36, so that there's some padding bottom. And we also don't want it to be stuck to the sides, so we'll do padding horizontal of 8. And for the background color, we'll do BG grey with the shade of 50. Now inside this section, first we're going to need the title. So let's have a div that will basically have a container for the title section. So let's do max width 6XL, so it has plenty of width. And we also want it to be centered, so we'll do margin auto, so that it automatically does the margin for the left and right. Margin horizontal auto, so MX auto. And inside this div, we're going to have another div that holds the title and description of the section, just like we've done for the other sections. So we're going to use text center to center this div. And the first element is going to be the title, so we're going to use heading 1 for this title, and let's call this title contact. And after it, we're going to have a paragraph. So the paragraph, let's say, get in touch if you want to know more, or let's get in touch with me. Okay, now let's see how that looks. As you can see, it needs some styling, so let's style it now. So for the H1, let's do let's make it 6XL, text 6XL for the text size, font size, and let's also make it bold. Okay, that's much better. Let's also do, let's see, let's give it a different color as well. Let's do text grey with a shade of 800. And that makes it darker. We'll do 700, 600, 700. No, it's actually good. It's good. It's consistent with the other titles. Now for the paragraph, let's just give it some padding top so that it's Yeah, so that has some spacing between it and the title. And also, let's just like like we done for the other sections, we'll do text Excel. So that's it's a bit bigger. Okay, brilliant. Now let's get stuck into the form. We're going to have a div right after the div that has the information about the section. We're going to have a new div, and this div is going to have margin top, so that there's some spacing between this div. So this div is going to be the container of this contact form, and it's going to have some spacing between it and the title and description of the div above it. So we'll do empty 16, and we're going to make this relative. So the positioning is going to be relative, and we're going to give it a max width of 4XL. And we don't want it to be like, we want it to have automatic margins on left and right, so we'll do margin horizontal auto, MX auto. And inside this, we're going to have a nice gradient in the background. So this is going to look like a card design, like we done for the so as you can see, if you remember the cards for the services, we have this nice effect. We're going to replicate it over here as well. So we're going to have this div that is going to be absolutely positioned. So we have a div right inside this container that we have just done, and we're going to give it a z-axis of 10, so we can basically throw it in the background. So it will be behind the card that will hold the contact form, and we're going to also give it inset 0, so that it will have top 0, left 0, bottom 0, right 0. It will basically have, it wouldn't have any spacing between it and the parent div. And we're also going to give it a BG gradient. So we're going to do BG gradient to R, so the direction is from left to right, just like we've done with the other gradients. And we want to do from primary to secondary. So these are the colors that it will start from. So we'll start from primary color, and it will have a gradient to the secondary color. And we also want to give it shadow large. And now we're going to apply the transformation, so that it has that nice effect where it's skewed and it's rotated for small devices. So it's going to be skewed for normal devices and rotated. It's not rotated for small devices. So let's do transform, and then we're going to have the class minus skew_y6. So it's going to have a negative skew of a negative vertical skew of 6. And for small devices, we're not going to have any skew. We're just going to rotate. So to do that, we're going to do SM skew_y0, so that there's no skew for small devices. And for small devices, we're just going to negatively rotate by 6. So we'll do minus rotate 6. And also for small devices, we're going to give it a border radius of large. So we're going to do rounded large. Now after this gradients, we're going to have a new div, and this div is going to now be a container for this contact form. So this new div is going to be relatively positioned, so we'll use the relative class. And now we're going to use Z20. We're going to have a Z index of 20. That's way it will. This is going to be a card design, and it's going to be on top of the gradient that we have just done. So it's going to keep that consistent design, as you have seen in the services section, where we have the background, the gradient background, and the card on top. So yeah, let's do that as well. So we're going to, after we do Z20, we're going to make it background white. So just to clarify, the Z20 will have a higher Z index, so therefore it will be closer to us on the Z axis, whereas Z10, the gradient is going to be on the background. Okay, so we're also going to give it BG white, and we're going to make the border radius medium, so we'll do rounded medium. And we're also going to do shadow medium. And finally, we're going to give it a padding of 12, so we're going to have all around padding of 12, so top, left, right, and bottom. And so let's see how that looks before we continue. So we're just going to have some content there. As you can see, it looks brilliant. Yep. So back to the code. So we've done PT12 as well, so that's now when we have the form inside it, the form wouldn't be stuck to this div. It will have some padding around it. Okay. Now let's get started with the actual form elements. So we're going to have the form, so we're going to use the form tags. And again, this is for now is going to be for design purposes. We're just doing Tailwind CSS, so we're going to leave the action blank. We're going to do action equals nothing, like empty. And inside this form, we're going to have a div that will basically have store the elements, that will basically hold the elements. And this is going to be done in a grid fashion. So the grid is going to be just like how I explained with the other grid. I mean, it's fairly simple. So we're going to have the grid, and then we're going to have grid calls 1, so that on all devices is going to have one column, but then we're going to actually have specific. We're going to make sure that on medium devices is going to have 2 columns. So on all other devices, it's going to have 1 column, but on medium devices it will have 2 columns. And we also want a horizontal gap between the elements of 8. So we're going to gap x8. And for vertical spacing, we're going to have 6, so gaps y6. Now inside this grid that we have just done, we're going to have an input element. So we're going to have the form elements right now. So the first one is going to be a name input element. So it's going to be a text field for the name, so the user can type his name. So the type of this input is going to be text. And we're going to do a placeholder as well, and for the placeholder we're going to have name. And for the class, let's style it up now with the classes. Let's see how that looks first. First of all, let's just make sure it's okay. Yeah, we can basically continue. So we're going to give it a border, and for this border we're going to make it grey, so we're using border grey 200 as well. Third class, we're going to have outline none. We don't want any outline for this element, and we want it to be stuck to the form, so we'll do padding horizontal of 4. And we also want spacing between each element, between the form elements, so we'll do padding vertical of 2. And we also want some border radius on this element, so we'll do rounded medium. And we want the border to change, so the shade of the border, we want it to be more dark. We want it to be darker when the user hovers over the element. So to do this, we'll do border grey 400. Let's see how that looks now. So as you can see, if we hover over it, the border is actually getting darker. And when we click on it, let's make it even more darker. So let's do on focus. So focus border grey is 600. So as you can see, it's a very light shade of grey, and then when we hover over it, it becomes darker, and then when we click on it, it actually becomes even darker, and the shade becomes 600. So as you can see, hover is self-explanatory, and focus is basically when you click on it. And now after this, we're going to pretty much copy and paste this. We're just going to change some stuff, minor stuff. So we're going to have we're going to have 3 input elements. So let's copy and paste this 2 more times. Now for the second element, we want it to be an email element. So it's going to be a text field for your email, for the user to type his email, and it's going to be the same styling, just we're going to have the placeholder as email. And the third one is going to be subject, and the same styling as well. Now we're going to have one more element in this form, which is going to be the text area, so the user can basically type his own message. Now for this text area, we want it to have 5 rows, so for the rows attribute of this element, we will set it to 5. And we also want to give it a placeholder of message, because this element is going to be for the message of the user. And let's also style it. The styling is going to be the same as the other ones, so let's go ahead and copy and paste the styling. So let's see how that looks before we continue. Okay, we want to also have for medium devices, we want the subject to take 2 slots as well. So let's do that now, so that it can have its own row, because right now it's sharing it with the text area. So let's see how that looks now. Okay, that's much better now. Also, let's give the text area as well. So let's style the text area. This text area is going to be the same styling as the other ones. The only difference is that it's going to be exactly the same as the subject input field. So that should basically fix it up. Yep, that's perfect now. Finally, we just need one more button, which is going to be the submit button, and we should actually be done with this portfolio website. So let's go ahead and right after this div that is the wrapper for the form elements, right after that div we're going to have a button. So let's have open button tags right under that div, and for this button let's style it using inline block so that it takes up the entire width, and then we're going to give it a width of auto, so that basically the width will be in accordance with the content of this button, which is the text. Okay, and also we're going to give it margin top of 4 so that there's some margin between it and the form elements, and we also want to give it a padding horizontal of 6 so that it's not stuck to the border, and we want to give it a vertical padding of 2 as well. Vertical padding of 2 so that the text has some spacing between it and the actual button border. And let's see how that looks now. So for the text we want it to be called send message, and now we want this to be a gradient as well, so let's do bg gradient to right. So for the class we'll add a bg gradient to right, just like we done for the other one. And for the colors we're going to do from primary to secondary, just like the other gradients. And we want the border radius to be medium, so we'll do rounded medium. And we want a small shadow as well, so we'll do shadow medium. Okay, now as you can see the text is black. We want to make this white so it can be consistent and looks better. So we'll do text white, and we want to also make it bold, so we'll do font bold. And let's see, that should basically do it. We just want to make it a bit smaller as well. Use text SM, so it looks better with the bold font. Yeah, that looks good now. So that concludes this website. I hope you have enjoyed this portfolio website. You are free to use this however you want. It's basically a gift from us. Let's see how basically everything is laid out and how it's looking. So as you can see, this is the front page of the website, and we have this section, self-introduction section, where you can basically you can have a small paragraph about yourself and your name. Now you won't have to procrastinate about making your own portfolio website. You can basically just design this even more and make it even prettier if you want to. Then we have the services section, so you can put in your own services that you offer, and then you have your work section, which is basically the projects you've worked on and the achievements that you basically have achieved. And finally, the contact form is if any employers want to contact you, or if anyone wants to work with you, they can do so using the contact form. So you can basically add more to the design of it and make it even prettier, and also program it so that the contact form is functional. So that pretty much summarizes this project. I hope you have enjoyed it.